In this lesson, we're going to continue discussing whether two lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. So we talked about this in a previous lesson, but when we look at it in this lesson, the problems will look a little bit different than the previous ones. But the information here is still the same. We're going to use this information. So we know that parallel lines have the same slope, have equal slopes. We know that perpendicular lines have slopes that are opposite reciprocals of each other. And we also know that two lines are perpendicular if the products of their slope is -1. Okay, so let's look at some problems, how this is going to look in this lesson. So basically, it'll look something like number 1. So number 1 says this: are the following two lines parallel, perpendicular, or neither? So in these examples, points will be given. In the previous lessons, it was an equation that was given, and you had to look at the slope to determine whether the lines were parallel, perpendicular, or neither. So in this case, though, you're looking at points on the line. So when you read this, this is read line AB. So line AB contains these 2 points, contains points A and B. So remember, in geometry, when you name a line using 2 points on that line. And we denote the points normally with capital letters. So A is on that line and B is on that line. A has coordinates -2, 4. B has coordinates 2, 7. So if you were to look at this in terms of the coordinate grid, this is what you're looking at. So watch. So A has coordinates -2, 4, and B has coordinates 2, 7, and that's going to be called line AB. So -2, 4 is right here, and so that is point A, and the coordinates are listed as -2, 4, and so that's point A. And then point B is 2, 7, which is right here, and that's point B. And when we draw the line, we have this right here. And when you name that line, we name the line AB, or BA does not matter. We're going to call it AB. And the symbol for line, rather than just saying the word line, is the symbol of line right above the names A and B, right above the points A and B. So this right here means line AB. So line AB contains the point A and the point B. Okay? And the other line CD, so line CD contains the point C and the point D. C in this case has coordinates 3, -8. So 3, -8 is right here. So that's C. And D has coordinates 7, -5. So that is right here. So that's D. And when you draw the line, we can name this line as line CD, with the symbol for line right above it. So that's the symbol for line right there. Okay? And what we're interested in doing is determining if those two lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. And you can't just look at this and say, yes, they're parallel because they look parallel. You can't do that. You actually have to show why you're saying they're parallel. Why you're saying that the lines are perpendicular. And why are you determining that the lines are neither parallel nor perpendicular. Okay? And so to do that, we're going to have to find the slope. All right? But I just wanted to remind you from high school geometry what this notation meant. So line AB means that points A, B are on that line, and so we're going to name the line using those 2 points. Line CD contains point CD. Okay? All right, so here we go. So here's the work. So if you want to determine whether those two lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither, then you're going to have to find the slope, right? Parallel lines have same slope. Perpendicular lines have slopes that are opposite reciprocals of each other. So let's find the slope. So the slope, so we're going to do this. So here's your work. And by the way, you can use a slope formula. The slope formula is y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. All right, so that's what we're going to use. So here's the work. So the slope for line AB, I'm going to note it like this, slope for line AB is equal to, let's go ahead and I'm going to do this, I'm going to go ahead and write it up here. So this will be x1, y1, this will be x2, y2, this will be x1, y1, this will be x2, y2 when I find the slopes. So for this line AB, the slope will be, remember you say y2 minus y1. So y2 is 7, subtract y1, which is 4. So 7 subtract 4 divided by. Now remember, the order matters. So if you put y2 first in the numerator, then you have to put x2 first in the denominator. Remember, you could have also said y1 minus y2, but since I put y1 first, I must say x1 first. x1 minus x2. Does not matter which one you use, you get the same answer. So 7 subtract 4. Since I start with 7, I've got to start with 2. 2 subtract negative 2. So the numerator, 7 subtract 4, is 3. The denominator, 2 subtract a negative 2, means 2 plus 2, which is 4. So the slope of this line is 3/4. Now let's find the slope of line CD. So the slope of line CD equals, and we do the same thing. Remember, the change in y goes in the numerator, and the change in x is always in the denominator. Rise over run. Negative 5 subtract a negative 8. Negative 5 subtract a negative 8. Right? You always subtract. So you see you're subtracting. And then since I start with negative 5, I must start with 7. 7 subtract 3. All right, now be careful. Negative 5 subtract a negative 8. Remember what that means. Negative 5 subtract negative 8. Remember, I'm going to go ahead and put that here. Negative 5 subtract negative 8. You can always change subtraction to addition by adding the opposite. So that becomes negative 5 plus 8. And negative 5 plus 8 is 3. So the numerator is 3, right? The denominator, 7 subtract 3, is 4. So notice the slope of line AB and the slope of line CD are the same. So you're going to say since the slopes are equal, the lines are parallel. Okay? All right, so that was number 1. All right. Number 2. All right, let's do number 2. So number 2, it asks you this. It says, determine if line AB, remember this means line AB, is parallel, perpendicular, or neither to line CD. And so AB contains the points AB, and CD contains the points CD. All right, so here's your work. So we got to first of all find the slope of line AB. All right, and so we're going to use the slope formula. y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. So let's go ahead and call this x1, y1, x2, y2. And then for CD, let's call this one x1, y1, x2, y2. Okay? All right, so the slope of line AB, now we have to use these points. Make sure you're using the correct points. AB, you must use A and B. CD, you must use C and D. Okay? All right, so 7 subtract 3. Subtract your y coordinates. Now since I started with 7 in the denominator, I have to start with negative 5. I have to start with x2. Negative 5 subtract a negative 9. 7 subtract 3 is 4. Negative 5 subtract negative 9. Remember that means this. Negative 5 subtract negative 9. Change that to addition. That becomes negative 5 plus the opposite of negative 9, which is 9. And that is 4. So you get 4 divided by 4, right? Which is 1. So the slope of line AB is 1. All right, let's find the slope of line CD. Slope of line CD. Do the same thing, except this time you have to use points CD. So 2 subtract 6 divided by, since I started with 2 in the denominator, I have to start with negative 7. negative 7, subtract a negative 11. All right? So remember, you got to subtract the y coordinates in the numerator, subtract the x coordinates in the denominator. So don't mess up and use the wrong coordinates. The numerator, 2 subtract negative 6, that's a negative 4. The denominator, remember that is, so let's look at that. The denominator, negative 7 subtract a negative 11. Change this to addition. That becomes negative 7 plus the opposite of negative 11, which is 11. So it becomes, what's that, positive 4? So we get 4. And we know that negative 4 divided by 4 is a negative 1. So the slope of line AB is 1. The slope of line CD is negative 1. All right. First of all, are they parallel? No, they're not. They can't be parallel, right? Because they don't have the same slope. Are they perpendicular? Are these two slopes opposite reciprocals or negative reciprocals of each other? And the answer is yes, they are. The reciprocal of 1 is 1, and the opposite of a positive is a negative. All right. So we're going to say since the slopes are opposite reciprocals of each other, or you can say the product of the slopes is negative 1, right? Because 1 times negative 1 equals negative 1. When you multiply those together, you get negative 1. And so we're kind of using this idea. Two lines are perpendicular if the product of their slopes is negative 1. All right, so since the slopes are opposite reciprocals of each other, the lines are perpendicular. All right, so that's number 2. Not difficult at all. You just, in each of these cases, you're finding the slopes using the slope formula. Okay, number 3. So number 3, you want to determine whether lines MN and RS are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. So you're given 4 points. You got to make sure, you have to make sure you're using the correct points on these lines. So let's find the slope of line MN. So here's your work. The slope of line MN is going to equal, so remember the slope formula is y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1, right? So that's your slope formula. Okay, so here's MN. So you have your MN first. Those are the first 2 points, and then this one right here will be the points on line RS. All right, so let's call this x1 y1, x2 y2, and these 2 points we'll say x1 y1, x2 y2. Okay. All right. So the slope of MN. So we're going to start with 4. Y sub 2, 4. Subtract 3 divided by, now since I start with 4, I've got to start with this 4. 4 subtract a negative 1, right? 4 subtract 3 is 1. 4 subtract a negative 1 means 4 plus 1, so that's 5. So the slope of line MN is 1/5. Now we're going to find the slope of line RS. So the slope of line RS equals, do the same thing, y sub 2 minus y sub 1. 2 subtract 1, 2 subtract 1, divided by, since it started with 2, I have to start with negative 2. Negative 2 subtract 3. Well, 2 subtract 1 is 1, right? Negative 2 subtract 3, or negative 2 and a negative 3 is a negative 5. Okay? So, which I can write as negative 1/5. All right, now, look at those 2 slopes. Are they equal? Well, they cannot be equal because one's positive, one's negative, right? So they're not equal. Are they opposite reciprocals? Don't always be careful. Some people seem to think, well, if one's positive, the other one's negative, then they must be perpendicular. Yet be careful. Think, what is the reciprocal of 1/5? The reciprocal of 1/5 is 5 divided by 1, which is 5. That's not what this is. So are the 2 lines, are these 2 lines parallel, perpendicular, or neither? Well, they're not parallel, they're not perpendicular, so you have to say neither. All right, so since the two lines, well, we can just, let's write it like this. The two lines are neither parallel, perpendicular. Okay, so the two lines are neither parallel or perpendicular. Okay, and the reason is because their slopes are not equal, nor are they opposite reciprocals. Okay, and so that's what we have so far. Not difficult at all, just using the slope formula. Okay, let's do B. So in B, so here's the line MN contains those 2 points. I'm going to separate them. And then line RS contains those 2 points. So the slope of line MN will equal, let's label these x1, y1, x2, y2. And over here, let's call this x1, y1, x2, y2. So the slope of MN, let's start with y2. So -3 subtract y1, which is 2. -3 subtract 2, divided by, since I start with -3, I have to start with 1. 1 subtract -2. The numerator, a -3 and a -2 is a -5. The denominator, 1 subtract a -2 means 1 plus 2, so that's 3. So the slope of line MN is a -5/3. All right, now let's find the slope of line RS. All right, now keep in mind, this is the work, so you have to show your work. So if you see something like this and it says show work, you have to show this work. You can't just say the lines are parallel, the lines are perpendicular, the lines are neither. You have to explain your reasoning. So you must show where you're getting those slopes from, how you're finding those slopes. Okay, so for line RS, we're going to say 4 subtract 1. Make sure you're subtracting the right coordinates. Don't make a mistake and subtract the wrong coordinates. Always be careful. y2 minus y1. That's the reason why we label these, so there's no mistake. And then x2, 3 subtract a -2. So 4 subtract 1 is 3. 3 subtract a -2 means 3 plus 2, so that's 5, right? Okay, now let's look at those two slopes. You can see the slopes are not equal, but are they opposite reciprocals of each other? So the reciprocal of 5/3 is 3/5, and the opposite of a negative is a positive. So yes, they are negative reciprocals or opposite reciprocals. So the lines are perpendicular. So the lines are perpendicular, since their slopes are opposite reciprocals of each other. Okay. All right. Or you can say this, or you can say the lines are perpendicular because the product of their slopes is -1. And you know it's -1 because -5/3 times 3/5. So the 5's divide out, the 3's divide out, a -1 times a +1 is a -1. All right, so that was B. All right, not difficult at all. Fairly easy idea, right? Fairly easy idea. Okay, let's look at number 4. So in number 4, so sometimes the problem can be written differently than what you saw. So it says determine whether line L, so that's lowercase l, line 1, so this line 1, line sub 1, so line 1. Now remember, 1 and 2 are subscripts, so we call it line 1, and this is line 2, right? And you would determine whether those two lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. So line 1 contains those 2 points. Line 2 contains those 2 points. All right. Now before we get started to doing the work, make sure you label these. Labeling these does help. Labeling these does help. So here's the first and second point of the line 1, and here's the first and second point of line 2. x1, y1, x2, y2. All right, so the slope of line 1. Let me write this better. The slope of line 1. Slope of line 1 equals, all right, 1 subtract 2, so y2 minus y1. Remember the slope formula. Slope formula, y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. So y2 is 1. I'm going to subtract y1. So 1 subtract 2 divided by, since I started with y2, I must start with x2. The order matters. Order matters. 3 subtract 1. So that becomes 1 subtract 2 is a negative 1. 3 subtract 1 is 2. So the slope of line 1 is a negative 1/2. Let's do line 2. So the slope of line 2 equals, slope of line 2 equals, and do the same thing. y2 subtract y1. So 0 subtract negative 1, just like this. And then since I started with 0, since I started with y2, I must start with x2. 2 subtract 0. 0 subtract negative 1 means 0 plus 1. So that's 1. 2 subtract 0 is 2. So I have the slope of line 1 is negative 1/2. The slope of line 2 is a positive 1/2. What do you notice about those? They're not equal and they're not opposite reciprocals, so the lines are neither. So the lines are neither parallel nor perpendicular. Okay, so the lines are neither parallel nor perpendicular. All right, so there's your work, and then you say what it is. Okay. Okay, so the next one. So here's line 1 and the 2 points that's on it. Here's line 2 and the 2 points that's on it. So let's label these x1, y1, x2, y2. First thing you should do to help you, because sometimes when you don't label these, you tend to substitute those in the wrong place. In line 2 here are the 2 points. Let's label this x1, y1, and this will be x2, y2. So the slope of line 1 equals y2 subtract y1. So 1 subtract 3 divided by 3 subtract 0. 1 subtract 3 is a negative 2. 3 subtract 0 is 3. So the slope of line 1 is a negative 2/3. Then we're going to find the slope of line 2, right? So the slope of line 2. So y2 subtract y1. So negative 5 subtract 4. Since it started with y2, I must start with x2, so that's negative 7 subtract a negative 1. Negative 5 subtract 4 means negative 5 plus a negative 4, so that's a negative 9, right? And then negative 7 subtract a negative 1 means negative 7 plus 1, so that's a negative 6, correct? Okay. Reduce. You must reduce. First of all, you need to know that a negative divided by a negative is a positive. And then 9 and 6 are both divisible by 3. So that becomes 3/2. All right, so the slope of line 1 is a negative 2/3. The slope of line 2 is 3/2. What do you notice about those two slopes? Those two slopes are opposite reciprocals of each other. So since the two lines, since the two slopes are opposite reciprocals of each other, the lines are perpendicular. All right, so that's part B. Let's look at C. So in C, you have line 1 containing those points and line 2 containing those points. So again, let's go ahead and label these. It helps. x1, y1, x2, y2. x1, y1, x2, y2. So the slope of line 1 equals, so we're going to subtract the y coordinates. Negative 7, subtract a negative 1. Make sure you're careful with that. Since I started with y2, I must start with x2. Y subtract 2. I'm sorry, 5 subtract 2. Negative 7 subtract a negative 1 means negative 7 plus 1, which is a negative 6. 5 subtract 2 is 3. Well, reducing this, negative 6 divided by 3 is a negative 2. All right, now we're going to find the slope of line 2. So let me go ahead and do this. The slope of line 2 equals, okay, y2 subtract y1. So 2 subtract 0 divided by, since we started with y2, I'm going to start with x2, negative 1 subtract 0. Well, 2 subtract 0 is 2. Negative 1 subtract 0 is negative 1. 2 divided by negative 1 is a negative 2. So what do you notice about the slopes of those two lines? The slope of line 1 is negative 2. The slope of line 2 is negative 2. So what can you say about those two lines? Those two lines are therefore parallel. So the lines are parallel. Since the slopes are equal. Okay? All right, so lines are parallel since the slopes are equal. Okay, the next one. So you want to determine whether line 1 and line 2 are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. So line 1 contains those 2 points, line 2 contains those 2 points. Knowing that, I can find the slope. So I can find the slope using the slope formula. So the slope of line 1 equals, let's call this x1, y1, x2, y2, x1, y1, x2, y2. All right, slope of line 1, 0 subtract 0, right? y2 minus y1 divided by 2 subtract 1. 0 subtract 0 is 0. 2 subtract 1 is 1, right? So 0 divided by 1 is 0. Okay? All right, so the slope of line 1 is 0. All right, let's do the slope of line 2. Slope of line 2 equals, do the same thing. So y2 subtract y1. Negative 5 subtract negative 5. Divided by, and then since I started with y2, I must start with x2. Negative 10 subtract 5. Negative 5 subtract negative 5 means the same thing as negative 5 plus 5, right? And then 10 and a negative 15, I'm sorry, 10 and a negative 5 is a negative 15. But let's go back to the numerator here. We all know that negative 5 plus 5 is 0, and 0 divided by negative 15 is also 0, right? Okay, so notice their slopes. Their slopes. The slope of this line is 0. The slope of this line is 0, right? Okay, so since the slopes are the same, what can you say? They are parallel. So the two lines are parallel since the slopes are equal. All right. Now, I just want to remind you about something. Do you remember that if the slope of a line is 0, what kind of line is that? If the slope of a line is 0, do you remember what that is? That's a horizontal line, right? So I just want you to remember this. Note, horizontal lines have slope 0, right? And so that means that if the slope is 0, then all horizontal lines are parallel. So all horizontal lines are parallel. So I just wanted to remind you about what the line looks like if the slope is 0. Okay, but this is your work right here. Okay, work and answer. Okay, all right, and then finally letter E. So we're almost done. Last one. Okay, so let's look at this one. So I want to find the slope of line 1, and I want to find the slope of line 2. I can easily do that because 2 points is given, and so since 2 points are given, I can use the slope formula. So remember, the slope formula is y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. Before I substitute these into the formula, let's go ahead and label these. It does help. See y2, y1, x2, x1, so let's label them. So this is my first point. We'll call that x1, y1. This is the second point of that line. We'll call it x2, y2. For this one, x1, y1, x2, y2. All right, so here we go. So here's your work. The slope of line 1 equals, all right, 7 subtract 5 divided by negative 2 subtract negative 2, right? Well, 7 subtract 5 is 2. Negative 2 subtract a negative 2, remember that means, and I'll go ahead and put that here, negative 2, let me go ahead and put that on here. So negative 2 subtract negative 2, remember change subtraction to addition by adding the opposite, becomes negative 2 plus, and then the opposite of negative 2 is 2. Well, negative 2 plus 2 is 0, right? Okay. So I get 2 divided by 0. Well, remember, 2 divided by 0, whenever you divide by 0, that's undefined. All right? So the slope of this line is undefined. Okay. Now, don't let that throw you off. Let's go on. We'll come back and talk about that. So the slope of line 2 is going to be, do the same thing, y2 minus y1. So 13 subtract 1 divided by, since I start with y2, I must start with x2, 5 subtract 5. 13 subtract 1 is 12, right? 13 subtract 1 is 12, and then 5 subtract 5 is 0, right? Well, 12 divided by 0 is also undefined, correct? 12 divided by 0 is also undefined. All right, now, be careful. Think about what you have. Okay, think about what you have. So you're like, well, I don't know what the slopes are, so how can I determine the slopes are parallel, perpendicular, or neither, right? So you got to remember this. Whenever you have a slope of a line that's undefined, when you graph a line that has undefined slope, what does that line look like? That's a vertical line, isn't it? All right. So these lines are vertical lines. Since the slopes are undefined, the lines are vertical lines. The lines are vertical lines. All right, so let's think about this. All right, so think about this. I'm drawing vertical lines, okay? So here's a vertical line, here's a vertical line. What do you notice about those two vertical lines? They are what? They are parallel. All right, and so they're vertical lines, and so therefore, the lines are parallel. Okay, so the lines are parallel only because they are vertical lines. Vertical lines are parallel. All right, but you have to know this. You have to know from previous lesson that since the slopes are undefined, they are vertical lines. You had to remember that. And then we now know that vertical lines, whenever you draw vertical lines, they are parallel. They're never going to intersect, right? They're parallel. Those two lines are distinct. They're different, so they're not going to intersect, so they are parallel. Okay, so that was letter E. Now, I really want to do one more just to see if you can think about this carefully. Let's look at one more. Okay. So we have line 1 containing those points and line 2 containing those points, and I want to know are those two lines, line 1 and 2, are they parallel, perpendicular, or neither? Well, since 2 points are given, I can determine the slope by using a slope formula. So let's call this x1, y1, x2, y2, x1, y1, x2, y2, right? Okay. So the slope of line 1 equals 8 subtract 6 divided by 3 subtract 3, right? Well, 8 subtract 6 is 2, 3 subtract 3 is 0, and we know that whenever we divide a non-zero number divided by 0, whenever 0 is in the denominator, we get undefined. All right, so that slope's undefined. Slope of line 2 is 2 subtract 2 divided by 9 subtract 4, right? 2 subtract 2 divided by 9 subtract 4. Well, 2 subtract 2 is 0. 9 subtract 4 is 5. What is 0 divided by 5? 0. All right, so line 1 has slope that's undefined. Line 2 has slope that is 0. Okay, now I'm going to ask you this. Based on what you see for the slopes, are those two lines, line 1 and line 2, are those two lines parallel, perpendicular, or neither? All right, so think about that. Are they parallel, perpendicular, or neither? Okay, so I want you to think about this. When we say that a line is undefined, what does that line look like? What kind of line is that? If the line's undefined and you were to graph it, what is that line? All right, so that line would be a vertical line, right? So that line here, so let's call this line 1. So line 1 is a vertical line. If the slope is 0, what is its line if you graph it? Well, that is a horizontal line, right? That's a horizontal line. So let's call that line 2. So when you have a vertical line and a horizontal line that intersect, how do they intersect? They intersect at right angles, right? A vertical line and a horizontal line will always intersect at right angles. So therefore, those two lines have to be what? Perpendicular. So line 1 and line 2 are perpendicular. So that one was a little bit challenging because you had to remember something. You had to think here. You had to rationalize through this process. Line 1 is undefined, so that means it's a vertical line. Line 2 has slope 0. When I say line was undefined, I mean the slope was undefined. The slope of line 2 is 0, so that means it's a horizontal line. And a vertical and a horizontal line always will intersect at a right angle. So that means, since they intersect at a right angle, that means that those two lines are perpendicular. So I just wanted to bring that up just to remind you some things about slope being undefined, slope being 0 in terms of its graphs, and the fact that perpendicular lines intersect at a right angle. Okay? All right, so that is the end of this lesson. It's not a difficult lesson. It's fairly simple, but keep in mind that in the previous lesson, you were given equations. In this lesson, you're given points on a line. So you have to use a slope formula to find the slopes of each one, then rationalize from that information to determine if the two lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. Okay, so that's the end of this lesson.